So this video is going to be about meet and separate. To get started on meet and separate, I'm going to use one butterfly. If you watched the butterfly video, you watched me make a two-headed butterfly where we've got this length of yarn in between and a butterfly on each end. And if you're not into butterflies, don't worry about this. You can actually have two bobbins, or you can have two popsicle sticks, or whatever you're using. So I put my yarn in and I create a nice little hill here. A little bit while we're talking about meet and separate about weft tension. Weft tension being the amount of weft and how tight it is. In tapestry, if you're familiar with other types of weaving, you need a lot, and I do mean a lot, more weft because it has to completely cover the warp. So if you're used to weaving cloth and you do a little bit of an angle here and you pull it tight and you go ahead and beat it in, that is never going to work in tapestry. You're going to draw in. So I usually create one hill, and then I take my fingers and in a little pinching motion, I make several hills out of that. So you can see I've got several little bumps or bubbles, as they're called in tapestry. Then I just beat that in gently, change my shed. Here's the meat part. I've got one butterfly, and on my selvages, just notice I'm actually moving, I'm using a pinching motion to slide that weft yarn right down against the selvage to exactly where I want it. I'm gonna go a tiny bit tighter because we're just at the beginning of this. On this side, same thing, sliding that right down the side. And I don't need to make separate bubbles because these bubbles are about the size I want them. So that's a good amount of weft yarn to have in there. And then I gently tap that into place. So that's the meat part, when the two butterflies came from the outsides together into the middle. That's the meat part of meet and separate. I'm gonna change my shed. Here is the separate part. And again, I'm gonna take at the point where they're turning, whether it's on your selvage in the middle, I'm just gonna smooth that yarn right down exactly where I want it so that I don't have a little bump or loop there when I'm done. Tap that into place and we're ready to meet again. Here's the other trick to meet and separate. If we go to that place where I turned, see there's a tiny little slit right there. There's a gap where those two yarns turned around. You may be familiar with interlock techniques where you would wind those two yarns around each other. It's really not necessary, providing that you change the place where the two yarns meet every single time. So this time, I'm just gonna take this one maybe over here on the side, on the left-hand side, and the right one I'm gonna bring a little farther over past the middle. I did make a little bubble there because it's a longer pass. I would say as a general rule, you don't want a hill that's any more than an inch and a half, maybe 2 inches. So you'll have between 2 and 3 on a 4 or 5 inch warp. Now we're in the separate part. And here we go on separate. Okay, now on this time in the meet, actually before I go on, let me show you that little gap. See, it's over here this time, but you definitely have a little tiny hole every place where you turn. Okay, the next thing that I want to show you is how you decide where to turn around. So I'm deciding where to turn around, first of all, making sure that I don't go where I went before. So here we are. And I'm gonna just close up really quickly and show you where these threads are. You've got two raised warp threads, and you've got one butterfly coming underneath each one of them. And then there's this little thread back here, the one that's lowered right now. It's going to become a little bit, sorry, I guess it's this one. It's going to become a little bit more important here in just a minute. So going back to this pass, you can see I've got a small bubble here, and I've got a bigger bubble here. I'm gonna actually just make that bigger bubble into 2 small bubbles. The reason I'm doing that is to make sure that the weft spreads out as evenly as possible. Okay, now I want you to watch this little lowered warp thread right here. When we change the shed, of course, this warp thread raises. And now you've got a raised warp thread between your 2 butterflies. If you were to just go back directly with each of them and leave that guy hanging out, you can see really quickly you're creating a gap here that will end up being an exposed warp and a hole in your weaving. And so when you're doing meet and separate, one of the 2 butterflies or bits of supply yarn has to reach out. So reach out this way, go around that extra warp before coming down. So that's a key part of meet and separate. On every other pass, you'll have to go around a raised warp thread. So that is meet and separate. And we'll go one more time here just to kind of seal the deal. And again, I'm looking for the place. Here's the place I turned before. I don't want to turn there. I could actually turn way over here. I could bring it way over. And sometimes you end up wanting to bring it way over. Let's say you're running out of yarn and one of your 2 butterflies is way bigger than the other. You might need to do that. So it can be anywhere along the entire width of the warp, just not the place you went before. So here's that thing again where we've got a raised warp that one of these 2 threads is going to, or one of these 2 weft pieces is going to have to go around. This close to the edge, I want to bring my outside one or my right hand side one around it. And I want to do that just to secure, have that yarn going through more of the warp and make that a little bit more secure. And again, anytime you've got a big bubble, you make little bubbles out of it and beat it down. And that is meet and separate.